pivotal moment in Washington. Senator Dick Durbin, just off the plane from Washington this moment, is a senior United States Senator from Illinois, a seat he's held since 1997, and the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Professor William Baude is the Henry Calvin Jr. Professor of Law at the University of Chicago here, and the Faculty Director of a Constitutional Law Center, and one of the country's leading constitutional experts and a scholar of originalism. Joining us by Zoom is Matt Schwartz. He's the federal courts reporter for the New York Times, where he's been extensively covering President Trump's administrative actions and the legal responses. And moderating this discussion today is IOP Director Heidi Heitkamp. She served in the U.S. Senate from North Dakota from 2013 to 2019 and also served as North Dakota's Attorney General. Please note that Professor Baude will have to leave a few minutes early, so if you have questions for him during the Q&A, go there first. Quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Of course, as usual, silence your cell phones. When it's time for the Q&A, mic will be placed in the audience, and as usual, we will give all the priority questions to students. Finally, please make sure to check out upcoming IOP events, including David Hogg, American Activism in the Balance, Monday, February 24th at noon at IDA on the third floor theater. And next Friday, February 28th at 12 p.m., the IOP Student Events Committee will be hosting an event titled Sanctuary or Stomping Grounds, Chicago in the Second Age of Trump. Make sure to check out IOP's website for future events. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our esteemed panel.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thanks for coming out. The genesis of this was really a lot of discussion about the angst that is going on across the country and the division that we're seeing across the country. So I want to start with an icebreaker to all three of our panelists. The Wall Street Journal last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, I read so much of this stuff, basically said that take a deep breath. Everybody calm down. This is not a constitutional crisis. This is a administrative transition. And that, yes, there are some things that even the Wall Street Journal would admit are probably unconstitutional, but it's not it doesn't rise to the level of a crisis. And so we're going to start with my great friend, Dick Durbin. Are we in a constitutional crisis, Senator Durbin?
We're damn close,
Oh,
to be very blunt and honest with you. And I look at the situation, and I'm an optimistic person. I don't think you can be in politics and not be optimistic. But we are facing a scenario which I don't think anybody really envisioned. In 2016, when Trump was elected, it was a surprise to him as much as everybody else. This time around, they were prepared for it and have been executing a plan. Mm-hmm. Remember, you can recall the time when he picked his first cabinet, Trump won. It was kind of a funny exercise. He was picking people for what this man can be Secretary of State. Look at him, look how he dresses up so nicely. Now we live in a situation where everything has been carefully planned and orchestrated, Project 2025, and the intensity of Trump's pace of change is part of the strategy. This is flooding the zone, as they call it. And you can't keep up with it. You literally cannot keep up with it. We were up all night with budget trying to figure that out. And he was announcing that he was now going to take over the post office and eliminate home rule in the District of Columbia. That was just last night. So God only knows what he said this morning. And I just want to say quickly, and I know the professor has to leave, so I'll be brief as a senator can be. 7 days ago, he junked the foreign policy of the United States for the last 75 years. He tossed NATO over the fence and said, I'll deal with Putin directly on the war in Ukraine and many other issues. My heart skipped a beat. My mother was born in Lithuania, came to Illinois as an immigrant. I've spent a lot of my career focusing on those three little Baltic nations. I love them, and I'm worried to death about their future. That is going on in the context of the transition with Trump, and we don't know where that's going to end.
Professor Baude, what do you think?
Yeah, so I sort of try to differentiate between three different things. So one is things that are really, potentially bad policy, things that, might change the country in a worse way, but that are the things that the president gets to do and the reasons elections have consequences. There's a lot of that going on. I don't want to belittle that, right? Then as a constitutional lawyer, there's the next level, things that are, some of them are unconstitutional, some of them are going to change the way we see the structure of the Constitution. He's going to win some of those cases in the courts. He's going to lose some of those cases in the courts. Those are also a big deal. And then the third level, which we haven't reached yet, is where I agree with the senator, is sort of the true constitutional breakdown, right? Where we'd see the president disobeying final orders of the courts or refusing to stand down after his term is over. And again, we're damn close to some of those things in the past. We may come back to those. We haven't hit those yet. I think it's important to register both that we haven't hit those yet, but that we have to be more ready for the possibility we're going to hit those than we've been in a long time.
Well, I would argue back that when you tweet that I am the final arbiter of the law, that might be a shot across the bow in that direction. So Matt, thanks so much for joining us. You've read, Jennifer sings your praises, says you're as nerdy as they nerd out when it comes to the federal courts. But having read the arguments, having watched this litigation, do you find the argument of constitutional crisis persuasive?
Well, there's sort of what the administration is telling judges in their filings, which for the most part has been, fairly sensible legal arguments. But then there's what the administration is saying outside of court about the courts as a whole. I missed the Wall Street Journal piece. I'd be curious to know, did they run it before or after the president of the United States tweeted, "He who saves his country does not violate any law"? Was it before or after that?
I think it was before that.
Because that's a pretty grave statement. It's also a bit vague. It could sort of be as you suggested, a shot across the bow for this third level that Professor Baude was talking about. This is just a scenario that comes to mind. Is it's a sort of statement for the type of judge that President Trump may in the future be seeking to appoint. He appointed about a quarter of the federal judiciary during his first term. And if you had a critical mass of judges who believed that he who saves his country does not violate any law, that would close the gap between what is legal according to our system of government and the president being above the law. Those would become the same thing if enough judges agreed with it. Now, is that a constitutional crisis? I think you could argue it either way.
When I think about this, that the scenario that's been set up, and you hear that he who saves his country doesn't violate the law, that we have executive orders that presuppose that we are in crisis. And so there is this kind of laying out of the table of, we are in an existential threat in the United States, therefore we have to use extraordinary power to kind of think about how we rectify the situation, whether that's in foreign policy, whether that is in domestic policy. The border in particular comes to mind because one of the first executive orders was in fact declaring a crisis at the border, right? And so now the question becomes, for so many of these students, I met with a group of students this morning who I think calibrated my thinking, because I think we sit back and we think that, this isn't affecting everyone equally. And one student this morning basically said that's 1 degree of separation, that pretty much every person he knew actually had a direct story about the effect of these decisions on individuals, whether it was a family member, whether it was a student, pursuing a PhD who now doesn't think that position is going to be available. And so the question becomes, I think, for so many of our citizens who are watching this, who may not be persuaded that we're in constitutional crisis, but also are persuaded that the role of citizenship is incredibly important at a time like this. And so I think that the first question that I would have for you, Dick, is what should citizens be doing right now? Here's a whole group of students here who are here on very short notice because they care about the country, but they want to know, what's my role as a citizen?
It's interesting, Heidi, you played this role yourself, and I like to measure what's going on by just instincts after a lifetime in politics. And interesting things are happening. I go through the airports of Chicago now, and total strangers walk up to me and say, "Thank you,
Really?
thank you." And I'm thinking, that's interesting, because there are also rallies by indivisible saying, "Durbin, get louder and angrier and stop being Mr. Nice Guy." So, that's literally what the signs are saying as we go into it. So there's a range of emotions here. But I would say that from where I'm sitting, the pace and velocity of the change that's taking place is overwhelming a lot of people. I mean, so damn much has happened, and we're not even 5 weeks in at this point to think what he's done. I mean, let me just throw out a few words and you associate them as you wish. Greenland, Panama Canal, 51st state. I mean, the list goes on and on. And what I'm saying to you is the grandiosity of this man cannot be overstated. And the pace of change cannot be overstated. And you say to the average person who says, "What am I supposed to do about this?" There are lots of things you can do. You can carry a sign, you can speak to your colleagues, you can prepare for the next election, but nothing is going to stop it from happening now. It's going to happen, and it'll take something like court review to have any kind of serious effort to slow him down.
Well, let's turn to court review. You and I had a nice conversation upstairs about, is he going to win more than he loses? And there's a lot of, for those of you who aren't lawyers or thinking about maybe going to law school, there's an old thing, you form shop. And there's a lot of form shopping going on right now, looking for that favorable judge that will issue the order. And that's almost a public relations ploy, almost more than anything else, because those orders can be overturned by the circuit court. But how do you see the litigation right now, Professor Baude? And you laid out some categories, but in terms of what do you see as the most egregious executive order that's currently being challenged in court, and what might surprise our students and our folks here? What might surprise them that it's okay constitutionally, in your judgment?
Yeah. So I think most egregious is obviously the order trying to revoke birthright citizenship. The Constitution says all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are U.S. citizens. And there's no chance, I think, the Supreme Court is going to uphold most or all of the executive order Trump's tried to issue. I think probably he even knows that. I think his lawyers probably know that. I think some of the behavior around impounding federal funds is also not going to survive. This is more complicated. This is where we have to go to law school to learn the details of the Impoundment Control Act, and the budget rider, and the NIH budget enacted in 2018. But some of those things are not going to survive. On the other hand, some of the things he's done around trying to eliminate so-called independent agencies, exercise much more direct White House control over the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, he's going to win those cases.
You think so?
I'm positive.
Even though they're independent agencies?
Even though the Supreme Court has already indicated that it thinks the president has the executive power and is supposed to be in charge of the executive branch, I think it's not a coincidence that the acting Solicitor General, who's a very good lawyer, it is sort of teeing these cases up for the court first. She knows those are cases she can win, cases that'll help sort of build the administration's credibility. So I think he's going to win those cases, and they're not going to be close.
Can I mention one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
In the Dellinger case.
Yeah.
That is timely as well. I just want to give you an insight into something that Heidi observed that I think is part of the calculation. In the first term of Trump, he approved 234 new federal judges. That was a record number, and it included 3 on the Supreme Court, for God's sake. So it was a record that occurred. Then came Joe Biden, who said, I want to bring a different face to the federal judiciary. I want to see more public defenders. I want to see more women. I want to see more minorities, exactly what the DEI is all about. And so I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and Trump had 234 in 4 years. We had 235 in 4 years. So why is that significant? Who cares? That's 1/4 of the federal judiciary every 4 years, 1/4 of it. And so some of the major cases that you're hearing are coming before judges from the work of the Judiciary Committee and Biden that really see the world a little differently than traditional Trump judges.
So Matt, we want to turn to you because you have been examining all of these cases. This is your responsibility as a reporter with the New York Times. Do you agree with Professor Baude that a lot of these, the president seems likely to win moving forward?
Well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not a JD. I'm more of an Article 2 specialist. I've only been covering the courts for a year and a half. So just getting the caveats out of the way up front. I want to make sure I defer to my two fellow panelists on this question. So now I'll plunge in with some rank speculation. I think I agree with Professor Baude on the firings and control of independent agencies. I think there is, a lot of case law, and in terms of the court's disposition, that the administration could book some wins. I think arguably the weakest thing that the administration has done so far, legally speaking, would be the OMB memo budget freeze. That is the one place where they've actually, at least that I am aware of, that they've backed off. The money's still frozen, but no longer are they claiming to the court that they had the authority under the OMB memo to freeze it. What they are now saying is that the same money is being frozen because the recipients of the money are not complying with the applicable laws, regulations, and terms of the grant. So they are saying that we are acting under our pre-existing authority before the EO. We're not defending the legality of the EO, and that's actually it's not a retreat on the ground, but it's a retreat from their initial argument that this OMB memo was constitutionally legit and we can do what we want with Congress. They're not, unless I'm missing something in their filings, I don't think they're claiming to have like impoundment power that they didn't have before on the basis of the EO memo. Sorry, that one got pretty weedy. I have a question for Professor Baude. I hear what you're saying about trying to shoehorn a revision to birthright citizenship through the words subject to the jurisdiction of, like with these concepts of domicile and allegiance that aren't anywhere in the Constitution actually. But isn't it true that the Supreme Court has never actually made a ruling on whether the children of people who are on U.S. soil and do not have legal status are or aren't U.S. citizens? Everyone always goes back to Wong Kim Ark, which I know okay, but not super well. But my understanding is that in that case, the plaintiff's parents were initially here legally, and what I'm getting at here is that maybe there would be some sort of way to thread the needle on birthright citizenship if that's what the court wanted to do. It wouldn't be a Dobbs-sized overturning a precedent. But tell me, I want to hear from Professor Baude about why I'm wrong about that if I am.
No, so you're right about the state of play. When the 14th Amendment was enacted, the concept of illegal immigration didn't really exist. And when the Supreme Court's major precedent...
Just remembering he's an originalist.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
so
there
is the
you
Supreme
go.
Court.
Yeah.
And when the Supreme Court's last precedent of this was decided, it dealt with something that's technically distinguishable. So it's not a case where we have ironclad Supreme Court precedent, although there is a footnote in a case called Plyler versus Doe that does say illegal immigrants are also subject to the jurisdiction just the same as anybody else. But nobody really thinks it hangs on that footnote. This is really a case that's going to come down, I think, to the court's view of this term in the Constitution, jurisdiction. And it's an area there's been a lot of scholarship. And I'll just say, again, jurisdiction's a technical word that you use in law school a lot. But the idea, which I think is what the court will say, is that people like diplomats or maybe even like enemy soldiers who are on U.S. soil, but they're not really subject to the U.S. government, right? They have diplomatic immunity or they're subject to the law of war. That's not the way immigration, even undocumented immigration works, right? Undocumented immigrants are here subject to all of our laws. In fact, if they're caught by law enforcement, they're subjected to various laws. They're subject to our jurisdiction in a very ordinary sense. I wouldn't be surprised if one or two Supreme Court justices tries to find the kind of running room that Matt's describing.
Let me guess.
Let me get. Haven't we already seen folks some judges in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals try to draw a link in their opinions between invasion and
Yes.
undocumented?
Yes, Judge Ho will say the president has declared the border crisis to be an invasion, and therefore people who come across the border, are in a sense an invading army. That the order goes much broader than that, frankly. So even that theory would invalidate most of the order. But I don't think the court's going to buy that theory.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want this just to be about birthright citizenship, because we haven't talked about Article 2. I mean, we talked about Article 2. We haven't talked about Article 1, Dick. You know, and people ask me all the time, when's Congress going to intervene? When's Congress going to assert their prerogative? I say, don't hold your breath, right? Don't hold your breath. So give us some hope from, you know, convince me that I'm wrong, that Congress will see a constitutional responsibility to step up like they did. I was bragging that when I was your age, I actually did a paper on the Budget Impoundment Act. So you know that this is very old precedent when I was in college. And so, you know, that was in response to Richard Nixon imperial presidency, right? Because Nixon did a lot of this activity, and Congress stepped in fairly quickly after Richard Nixon and said, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, we still have the power of the purse. So where is Congress right now in asserting its responsibility to basically set policy for the federal government?
The majority party is largely supine. They are not asserting the rights of Article 1, and I see evidence of that even yesterday. There was a man nominated to be director of the FBI, Kash Patel, totally unqualified.
I saw you're a big fan, Dick.
Oh, I've spent weeks trying to get a few Republicans to look at the reality of this. This man is a political operative who is taking over the criminal investigative agency that is respected around the world with 38,000 employees, who could turn loose an FBI agent on you or me and ruin our lives in a minute. And if you read his book, and God forbid I did, you think to yourself, how could you possibly give this man a 10-year term as director of the FBI? FBI agents come and seeing us as whistleblowers, saying, do something, you gotta stop this, he's destroying this agency. There's only one political person in the FBI, it's the director. All the rest of us have been career employees, and that's what the FBI is all about. So what does happen when we come up for a vote? We reached out to 7 different Republican senators in a variety of ways. I won't get into detail, but you can imagine, it wasn't me personally in most of these cases. We ended up with two ladies in the Senate on the Republican side, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. We needed one more. It was 51-49, and 2 more really, but
Yeah.
To think that we couldn't even convince them that this man was totally unqualified for the job makes me worry about the Republicans. They are scared to death, not just of Donald Trump, but we haven't mentioned him, the co-president at this point, Elon Musk, who literally can call and say, if you don't vote this, I guarantee you, you'll have $100 million on a primary opponent to challenge you. $100 million to him is nothing. And he could do that, and did as much in the last election.
Yeah, I mean, so how does a citizen then invoke the responsibility, Professor Baude, of Article 1? I mean, I look back and say, I voted for my congressional representatives. I want them to actually run the country. They're not doing it. Do I have any standing to assert Article 1 power as a citizen in the courts?
In the courts, no. As a citizen, you have standing to assert your own rights. So people whose citizenship is being revoked, people whose funding is being lost, they can and are suing. But the way our system of government works is we elect members of Congress and we have to hope they do their jobs. And if they don't, you know, we get another election in a couple of years.
I mean, so kind of an unsatisfying answer,
Yeah.
right? Right?
Not hopeful. I'm going to say a word, a hopeful word. I think ultimately this plays out to one man, the man you clerk for, Chief Justice John Roberts. He's got to decide at some point that things are getting away from us. And he has at least, I think, the power to put together 5 people on the court to move us in the right direction. Whether he will, I can't say. But if he does and asserts the rights of the courts to say that the executive branch has gone too far, the obvious question is, will the executive branch hear it?
Yeah.
Will they pay any attention to it? And the only that is possible is if a handful of Republicans say, enough. I may lose my seat over this, but we can't let this constitutional crisis go forward. we have to respect all three of these articles and the way they play against one another.
So I want to take us back kind of where we started from. There are a lot of authors out there, either in social media or in articles, who are really comparing this in a broader international setting, this move towards autocracy, this move towards the strong man, and let's admit it, we're mainly looking at strong men, the strong man kind of analogy. How do you put where we are right now, and this is for all three of you, in the context of what's happening globally, and how is American, we grew up believing that we were the city on the hill, that people ascribe to our form of government, imperfect as it is. How does the retraction that we have right now in terms of this balance of power that the Constitution has set out, how is that having an effect globally? We'll start out with you, Professor Baude.
Sure. So I'll just say, I think the political trends we're seeing in this country are very much global, right? You're seeing a lot of this kind of turn towards right-wing figures with anger about inflation and immigration and things like that everywhere. I think the thing that might make us different, we'll find out, is that we have a different constitutional system of government with a very strong judiciary that has a track record of
But no army.
sometimes stopping the president from doing things. Now, what will happen if the courts issue an order to the president and he doesn't listen to it? The Supreme Court doesn't have an army, but the president doesn't have an army either, right? I mean, the army obeys the president because the Constitution says he's the commander-in-chief. So if the president tries to go outside the Constitution, will everybody else still follow the president? That would be a real constitutional crisis. I hope we don't find out.
Dick?
Mark Milley was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Trump and became a friend of mine. And we went to dinner and talked from time to time. And two or three times I said to him, so if it comes down to an order from the commander-in-chief versus the Constitution, who wins in your judgment? He said the Constitution always wins, as far as he was concerned. That's why he's on the enemies list of Kash Patel and other things. I would just say I worry about the enforcement and where they will come down in the future. There are those within the ranks who may not see it the same way.
Yeah. What do you think, Matt?
On the international question?
Yeah.
I mean,
Just in general about kind of where we see. I think there's this sense of, and you read it, oh, look what happened in 1929 in Germany, and we're at that spot where we'll just ignore this until the tipping point where we end up with a government that is not accountable to the people. I mean, so when you look at these filings that you're looking at every day, how much of that is weaved through the kind of warning to the courts that this is, they're flooding the zone. This is a mammoth kind of overwhelming. How do you see the courts responding to that kind of argument?
The argument that what do you know? So I want to understand what you see the argument as. Just so yeah.
I think the argument is that if we don't stop them now, we then will reach a tipping point and it will be too late.
That's a pretty, I see the argument. I don't want to undermine, that's a pretty broad brush. It's like stop him from doing what exactly now? I think folks, we have to, I came into the courts thinking about them one way, and I think about them a different way now. This is sort of a sideways way of answering your question, but I think we have to start, the courts are still there. They're still independent. There have been a lot of lawsuits, but they have the capacity to deal with these lawsuits. The executive is fast, the judiciary is slow, but they do get it done. And I think we have to think about, the whole of America has to start thinking about the courts in a different way. Particularly after Dobbs, a lot of people started looking at the court as just, these guys are bought and paid for, they're legislators in robes, very cynically. They're all, we know how they're going to rule beforehand if we just know the party of their appointing president. And I don't want to say that there's no there, but unless we were sort of collectively willing to take a leap of faith that there is a certain amount of good faith, a certain amount of legitimacy to what the third branch is doing, no one's going to accept the outcome. So I think we kind of have to just throw our arms around the courts a little bit and not assume we know how they're going to rule. I think Senator Durbin's exactly right about the emerging preeminence of John Roberts as the kind of final counterweight here to what we're hearing from the executive branch. I know there was a lot of angst about Trump v. US and this holding by the Supreme Court that the president cannot be held criminally liable for his core constitutional duties, for performing those duties. However, that's very different from saying that courts can't find those core constitutional duties, or as the president construes them, can't find them to be civilly illegal. Trump v. US did not say the president gets to do whatever he wants under any circumstances. It just said you can't charge him criminally for core constitutional acts. So Trump v. US actually, when I read it, I was like, oh, the Supreme Court's actually reserving a lot of power. It's creating these three buckets of presidential behavior, and it's saying this is how we're going to think about these things in the future. So we don't know what the courts are going to do, and we kind of have to, just give them a little bit of grace and space to work through a pretty unprecedented situation. Sorry, that was a bit lengthy.
No, it was an excellent answer, but one thing that I would mention, that it always seems like the courts are like, please God, Congress, just do your job. I mean, right? I mean, they made impeachment a focal point of presidential behavior, and so I think there is this kind of duck that the judiciary instinct that they have to not get involved in politics, and I think the question is, are you getting involved in politics, or are you basically interpreting the law?
I mean, I might put the same set of facts a little bit differently, just from the judiciary side. I mean, you look at President Trump. He's been elected twice. In my view, legitimately both times. I don't think anyone showed that whatever foreign interference happened in 2016 was a but-for situation. It was there, but I don't think anyone demonstrated that made a difference. So he was elected twice by the people. The Congress chose not to impeach him twice. So there are a lot of checks and balances that are baked into the Constitution that you might think it's a good thing, you might think it's a bad thing. Donald Trump has passed through those checks. And I think you heard, ideas on the left that now it's Merrick Garland and Jack Smith's job to somehow take him off the board. And I think there's arguments that might not be the most desirable outcome, given, that these more fundamental systems that for whatever reason have decided not to intervene. So I have some sympathy for the courts, I guess. Like just what you were saying, I think they do actually make a decent point there, but maybe I don't want to be missing what you were saying either.
Yeah. So I want you all to be thinking about your questions. You have a great panel here, people who are in the mix, who are thinking about this every day, who are responsible, in Dick's case, for providing some kind of response. Most of you, a lot of you, are citizens of the great state of Illinois. He represents you. This is your opportunity. Sorry, Dick, to say thank you like you would in the airport, or to say, what the hell are you doing, Dick? Yeah, let's start there.
Hi, thank you. I lived in Chicago my whole life. My dad still raves about the Capitol tour we took like 10 years ago through your office. My question is for...
Name and yeah.
Ellie, I'm a first year here. My question is for any of the three of you. Obviously, with a document as complex as the Constitution, no president probably has ever followed it perfectly. So where do you draw the line between unconstitutional acts and a constitutional crisis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll say it actually happens every presidential administration. Some people say it's a constitutional crisis for exactly this reason, because every president does some things that seem unconstitutional. I draw the line between ordinary disputes about the Constitution and the disputes that go to the fundamental question of sort of who decides, and that sort of create our basic stability in government. And that's things like that courts get to decide cases, and that elections decide who holds office and who doesn't. those are pretty thin rails, but I think those are the ones that we really haven't shaken yet. And if we lose those, I don't know what we're doing.
I agree.
You're just going to agree with the
I
professor?
am. I really think it comes down, it's the rule of law. At the end of the day, if the court rules against your branch, do you respect the court's opinion? And it's a tricky question. I've sent plenty of letters to the Chief Justice on the ethics of the court. And I've tried not to cross the line. He may think I have, but having said those things about the court and the ethics of some of the justices, at the end, they are the legitimate people holding the power under the Constitution. And if they rule for or against the president, we have to be mindful and respectful.
Matt, do you want to weigh in?
I have a quick yes and. I think Professor Baude's, it's hard to improve on that, on what the thin rails that haven't been shaken are. I would just throw the First Amendment on the list as something that it's very unusual if you look at other countries. What I'm allowed to do in my work, and without fear of legal reprisal is very, very unusual internationally. It's also been a huge boon to the United States business-wise with respect to Silicon Valley. But the First Amendment is under significant, in some significant legal peril in ways that it hasn't been in a while. And some of the case law, New York v. Sullivan, is not that old. So what we're allowed to do is part of the system too. And I would add that as like another thin rail that if it gets, if it starts to move, that we would be in serious trouble.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Matt, because I think that's critically important. The attacks on the Sullivan decision right now, that would then change the way we look at the media as the fourth estate. So I think that's critical. Yeah, Robbie.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I'm Robbie. I'm a second year at the college. My question is for you, Senator Durbin. So I appreciate all the work you've done in your distinguished career, as well as Senator Schumer. But I do want to point out, I feel Democratic congressional leadership, it is very underwater right now, even among Democrats. And a lot of it is because they feel like you're not doing enough. I've also noticed that Democrats, particularly in the House, have failed to elevate a lot of the younger, more powerful voices, specifically Jasmine Crockett and AOC. Do you think, what are the best strategies for the future to fight back? And do you think that involves elevating some more younger, powerful voices in the Democratic leadership?
Two things that I hope you appreciate. We are in the minority. It is one thing to have aspirations of confronting Trump. It's another thing not to have the votes. And we have a couple possibilities of finding our way into this situation. For example, if they fail to mobilize a majority in the House, then they need us. And we sit down and work on a bipartisan basis. The Senate filibuster may be one application that gets us back into the game. But people say we're underwater, we're under votes. We don't have enough votes, number one. Number two, about young people and their impact on Democrats and their message. Heidi and I grew up in an era, I'll say I grew up in an era, where network television was a source of news. 7% of the American people get their news from network television these days. You know the world out there, the social media world. And influencers. I spent this last week meeting influencers. What the hell's an influencer? I'm learning. But you take AOC, for example. I mean, she is extremely talented and a powerful voice, and she has access to the media. She doesn't have to call the Democratic National Committee and ask permission. She's part of the conversation and part of the leadership of my party, and I'm glad she is. So I wouldn't say that they're being held back. Many of them are charging out in front of it, and other Democrats are being left in the dust.
Other questions? Here we start. Just because she's wearing a Packers shirt? Sorry.
Well, I'm from Lake County, so don't take this to heart. Hi, I'm Alyssa. I'm a third year in the college, and this has been such an insightful conversation. And earlier today, Heidi, at our meeting, we were talking about how there's just this general feeling of anxiety, especially among college students and graduate students, like with people getting their job offers from, federal agencies, taken away because they just don't exist anymore, or PhD candidates or PhD students learning that they no longer have the funding, or that the program that they were going to apply to can't take any more students. And I think we're all just wondering, what can we do right now? Like, what is the best way to sort of ease this feeling that it's not going away, frankly, and everyone's quite scared?
Dick?
Well, first off, if your dream is to embark on a federal career, this may not be the right moment. Things are in flux totally. In a lot of agencies I never expected to be, and I mentioned the FBI as a classic example of that situation. That's the frustration that you feel and I feel. I want to do something now. People want me to do something now, but there is nothing clear to me at this point that makes a significant difference in the pace of change which we're seeing coming out of this administration. We will have our time of reckoning, and there'll be a lot of pain before it. And the voters will have the last word, as they should, in an election. But to say that there's one bill that we can introduce, one speech that we can give, one economic boycott that we can initiate that's going to change this, I think is not realistic.
If I can just mention one thing we haven't talked about yet, it's
Yeah.
federalism. So, I mean, one underappreciated other thing that sets us apart from other countries is we have all these state governments that don't just change hands because the presidential election changes hands. You've got Jay Pritzker, who's the governor of Illinois, just gave a great State of the State address. And so one thing in the law school, we've seen this happen, is students whose job offers the federal government were pulled suddenly think, well, the Illinois Solicitor General's office is actually doing really important constitutional work. People maybe were originally thinking Department of Justice, but now they think, oh, actually, there's still other sites of governance, and that's a really important site of,
Good point.
Well, and I think it's really fair. There are a number of students on campus who want to support this administration, who are looking at opportunities to do that. And so, I mean, we are at a point in our dialogue where we've never seen this radical of a change, even between, I think, and I was in office during the first Trump administration, and Dick's right. I mean, we just kind of thought, oh, these are folks that we know, and they're not ideologues, and that has changed. And so there's a lot of people who see opportunity in this cycle as well. And maybe we come out stronger, but we need to think about. I would just say we need to think about what our role is as citizen, as the great founders of our Constitution believe that the most important role in a representative democracy is the role of citizen. And what does that look like? Take this question back there.
Hi, thank you for being here today. My name is Justin Taylor. I'm a fourth-year undergraduate student. And recent precedent has been that when a president comes into office with both control of the House and the Senate, normally at least one chamber flips around midterms. So my question is there any feeling among Democrats that maybe we just need to hold out until midterms and then after that just kind of block Trump and ride out the rest of his term?
Let me be first to say, Trump's numbers are going down. Elon Musk's numbers were never anything to brag about, and they're going down as well. And I think those two titanic egos in the little ship called Presidency of the United States are going to have a mutiny on their hands in a few weeks, if I'm not mistaken. I can't imagine these two guys working together for a long period of time. So the numbers are going to change. And we in the loyal opposition have to give reason for that. The notion that we are making all these changes in government to give bigger tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country is poison to the Republicans. They hate to acknowledge that. That's all we talked about yesterday, because it is a potent issue that reflects reality. So we have a lot of work to do before we start announcing for re-election and the like. But I think we've got ground to gain.
Yeah. Can I just point out, I think it would be a big mistake for the Democratic Party not to understand why they're not in power. And what was it about, bloat in government or the messages that really resonate with the American public in terms of what they want their government to reflect in terms of their values and their principles. And so If the Democratic Party does not learn the lessons that there is a reason for this, I think that this is not, I think they will have missed an opportunity to recalibrate how they have a conversation with the American public. We're going to go to the back. I think that's fair, Dick.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm a fourth year in the college, and I think your conversation earlier about enforcement of like federal court decisions and what to do if the president doesn't follow the court's decisions brought me back to like the Cherokee cases and the president's decision way back in 1831 not to follow the court's path. And I'm curious about whether you think that if there are any like action steps that we could take or like pressure to place now to kind of ameliorate the effects if that happens.
Okay, maybe you can explain the Cherokee cases.
Sure. So there was a series of rulings from the Supreme Court when Andrew Jackson was president about the limits of state power over the Cherokee Nation, and then Andrew Jackson didn't take any action to make sure that actually happened. Didn't take any action to stop Georgia from going into the Cherokee Nation anyway, where they'd been told by the court they couldn't do. He's supposedly said, John Marshall has made his decision, let him enforce it. That quote turns out to have been invented about 30 years later by Horace Greeley. But it's the kind of thing Andrew Jackson might have said. It's like a plausible invention. And the idea is, maybe the president was still sort of standing by. I'll say two things. One is, even that was not defying a direct court order. There wasn't an order from John Marshall to Andrew Jackson saying, back off or stop doing this. It was a sort of a third-party dispute where Jackson was sort of staying out of it. But I think this is also an area of citizenship. This is an area where it's just, we have to have a widespread norm and expectation that if the word of the federal courts doesn't go, that's unacceptable at a fundamental level. And that's something we all have to believe in.
Can I interject really quick? Okay. No, thank you. That was a great gloss. And if we had more time, I'd ask you to do ex parte Merriman and Abraham Lincoln next, but I don't think we do. But I actually think there's something arguably dangerous about the ambiguity of the messaging from articles from the White House right now about whether they will or they won't. And I think in terms of obeying an order directly from the Supreme Court, and we also have Vance saying judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power, which begs the question of what did he mean by legitimate? JD Vance has a JD from Yale Law School. I don't have a law degree. So this is just a big windup. I think someone needs to go to the White House, a reporter, could be me, one of my colleagues, and get a direct answer to the question. I think Hamdan v. Rumsfeld from the mid-aughts is a great place to start. You had President Bush saying we need to, we have to treat our Guantanamo detainees a certain way. You have the court saying, no, you have to do certain things in your military commissions process to abide by the Geneva Conventions and international law. And then you had the Bush people say, okay, we will do that despite having asserted in court that we have special national security prerogatives. So I would ask Vice President Vance, would the Bush administration have been within its constitutional rights to ignore Hamdan v. Rumsfeld and just do what it wanted at Guantanamo Bay? Yes or no? And that's the answer that we haven't heard, in my view, from the White House yet. Like what is their actual reading of Article 2? They've been sort of creating a lot of uncertainty around that, which I think arguably has strategic benefit for them. But I think it's very, very important that they be pinned down on what is their operating theory of this, not just in court filings, but with these strange tweets.
Yeah, I'm going to go over here.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm a second year in the college, and I just wanted to go back to Alyssa's question earlier about what can we do now, and specifically ask this to Professor Baude in the sense that I think before a lot of us thought about lobbying as a really effective way to do this, but with the overturning of Chevron, I'm not sure if that's going to be as effective anymore, and do you think in this administration we're going to see that idea challenged? And if so, I guess I'm asking you to predict the future in the sense of how do you think that's going to go?
Yogi Berra once said, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. I think a lot of the administrative state, is still there. It's still doing a lot of important things. And part of what you're seeing now is that the Supreme Court, the university doesn't need decisions like Chevron to have a lot of important consequential authority. A lot of this just comes down to what's actually in the laws that Article 1 Congress wrote a long time ago, right? So there are a bunch of restrictions, a bunch of rules. There are places where the administration has a lot of discretion, places where there are rules that constrain it. And so the two questions are going to be convincing agencies to use their discretion for good rather than for ill, and then convincing courts to stop the agencies when they cross the lines.
Dick, you want to weigh in? Yeah, I mean, Chevron again is a decision that says, for God's sakes, Congress, do your job. And I think you're going to see more of that coming out of the courts. Yeah, take yours.
Hi, my name's Bernie. I'm a 3L at the law school. Also grew up in St. Charles, so I've been one of your constituents for a long time. So thank you. My question is kind of in the foreign affairs realm. I think this has been just an awful week and a very helpless week to just see the emboldening of Vladimir Putin and just, I guess, the malignment of Zelensky and the lies that are being put out there. And but I guess my biggest fear is, we have a president who's emboldened Putin, and an emboldened Putin goes and invades another NATO ally, and President Trump doesn't respond. And I think just for justiciability reasons, it would be really hard for the courts to get involved in that under the political question doctrine. And then I just don't really know what Congress can do in response. I think given that that's more of a passive response from Trump that is wrong, it'd be hard for something like the War Powers Act to come into effect. And so I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on what Congress can do if Trump refuses to, affirmatively adhere to our responsibility as a NATO ally.
I tell you, in 1979, talk about ancient history, I visited the Soviet Union on something called ACYPL. You may be familiar with it. And I saw it. I saw what it looked like. And I went into Lithuania, where my mother was born, and saw what Soviet life looked like. And I thought to myself, these poor people will never get out from under the yoke of communism. It's terrible what it's done to them. I was dead wrong. 25 years ago plus, there was the emergence of these Soviet republics into separate, independent democratic states. And the one thing I could hope for was we could get them into NATO, and the NATO alliance would stand by them if they were ever threatened, because they're small, they're tiny, they're pushovers for somebody like Vladimir Putin. And now, a week ago, between Vance and the President of the United States, they threw out 75 years of foreign policy, 75 years that had protected us from the Third World War, successfully protected us. I don't know where we are today. And I don't know what the NATO allies think we're doing. I mean, that they would not be called into a conversation about resolving the situation in Ukraine. My God, they sacrificed. Poland started embracing all these refugees from Ukraine, as an example, and so many other countries did so much to help them. 46,000 lives were lost, Ukrainians who lost their lives in defending their own country. And the President of the United States just announced they somehow invaded themselves. I mean, you think to yourself, what kind of madness is this? It's a madness that's inspired by a bromance with Vladimir Putin. Let's get down to the bottom line here. And it continues. I don't know where the hell we're going here. I really can't explain it to you, but I don't like the looks of it. And I'm afraid we're going to have a lot of countries that are going to pay a heavy price.
So, I mean, Dick, just to follow up on that, would that be the breaking point with your colleagues in the Senate if he didn't honor our commitments under NATO?
For some, Roger Wicker,
Yeah.
who
was very strong at Munich.
Mississippi senator, Republican senator, who said as much on the floor last night. We had a vote, a symbolic vote on this issue, and he made it clear he's still loyal to Ukraine. I'm thanking for it afterwards. But, I don't know about the others. I mean, they're newcomers since you left the Senate, and I just don't know what makes them tick. Wicker's been around for a while, and I think has good judgment in most issues, but I don't know where the others are coming from.
Is there anything the courts can do?
On foreign affairs, the courts have generally taken a very light hand. This is very much an area where elections have consequences.
Yeah. Well, we have time for one more question. Okay. Someone's pointing.
Oh,
You
great.
had an advocate there, so that's
Thank you.
how that worked, Kate.
Hi, my name is Kate. I'm a fourth year in the college, and I'm also one of the presidents of the College Democrats on campus. And the last question that you just brought up, Heidi, speaks to mine as well. I think a lot of young Democrats have been feeling sort of not just helpless, but also sort of this idea that like the burden is on us to do something. And maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I feel like at times I undercut my conservative and Republican peers for their ability to also grow very concerned about these problems. And this is for Senator Durbin. I'd love if you could just contextualize a little bit more about what those conversations look like when you're sitting with Senator Susan Collins, for example, and you're trying to get her to, listen to your facts and convince her. And maybe if there's any lessons there that we can apply within our own communities to try to diminish sort of these like partisan forces that are clouding common sense.
Heidi knows what I'm about to say is the truth because she lived it as I live it now. There's a human side to this that is much different than the political side. And I have friends of mine who say, I was watching C-SPAN and you were sitting there talking to Susan Collins. She's the enemy. Don't talk to her. Well, yesterday on the votes on Kash Patel, I talked to her and she voted as I hoped she would. And the same thing is true with Lindsey Graham. What are you doing talking to Lindsey Graham? He plays golf with this guy. And you're going to go out and talk. Lindsey Graham and I are working on Section 230 on social media. And we're doing it on a bipartisan basis. The point I'm trying to make to you is keep the issues, the important issues front and center, but don't give up on the human side of this equation. There are times when we can work and should work with the other party to try to do things that are good for this country at the right moment. In terms of what you should do at the moment, don't assume everything's going to change within a week if we figure out the right formula. We have to be patient, and that's tough, particularly when you're young. You're impatient, you want things to happen. But I sense the numbers are changing already. It'll take a while. Ultimately, I believe we will prevail. I hope we can survive to reach that point.
Well, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank all of you. And of course, students always ask the best questions. There's just no doubt about it. You guys have been great. And thank Senator Durbin, operating on what, 1 hour of sleep? 2 hours of sleep. Wants to hear from all of you, and this is valuable. And Professor Baude, thank you so much. And Matt, wow, if you've only been studying the courts for a year and a half, I think you already have a law degree, near as I can tell. You're just amazing. Thank you so much. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? Yeah, you want final word?
I want 60 seconds for University of Chicago moment.
Okay.
Because I want to share this with you because some people know, many people don't. The reason I'm sitting here today because of a professor at this university. His name was Paul Douglas. He was an economics professor who ran for the Senate in 1948 and was elected. And I was an intern in his office in the last year, 1966, when I was still at Georgetown University. 2 or 3 things that are so noteworthy. Paul Douglas was a professor here who served on the city council of the city of Chicago. Out of the 50 wards, he was the one independent alderman. And he ran for the primary to become US Senator in 1942 and lost. The day after he lost, he enlisted in the US Marine Corps. He still holds the record. He is the oldest recruit in the history of the Marine Corps. He was 50 years old when he enlisted, went through training in Parris Island, and was gravely wounded in battle, lost the use of his left arm. But because he couldn't sign letters and move them as an intern, I sat there pulling the letters. That was my first job in politics. 30 years later, I was elected to his Senate seat. So there's a University of Chicago story in my background, even though I've never been a student. I still respect the school very much.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Great legacy. Great legacy.